When fire rages, when floodwaters rise, or, when a massive system like Hurricane Helene just rips through the coastline, there's one acronym that probably springs to mind for most Americans: FEMA.
Uh-huh. The Federal Emergency Management Agency.
Exactly. It's supposed to be that ultimate safety net, right? The federal muscle that arrives when local resources are just completely overwhelmed.
But, our sources today, they really show us that this cavalry, let's call it, has been really struggling to live up to that reputation.
How so?
Well, when you're obligated nearly $30 billion in disaster aid each of the previous 3 years, that's a staggering investment, and yet you still leave, and this is a quote, vulnerable Americans without the resources or support they need. Well, the system isn't just leaking, it feels like it might be fundamentally broken.
Right. And that is really the core issue we're diving into today. We're unpacking Executive Order 14180. It was signed January 24th, 2025, and it immediately establishes the Council to Assess the Federal Emergency Management Agency.
And this isn't some, typical departmental review, is it?
No, not at all. Our mission here is to understand why this really urgent, high-level review was ordered, and, maybe more importantly, what major, almost philosophical structural changes the Council is mandated to investigate.
Okay.
This document, it really suggests the government is ready to question the very foundation of how we do centralized disaster relief in this country.
That's absolutely right. The language in the EO, it's incredibly forceful. Section 1 directly ties the Council's creation to the failures observed during the federal responses to Hurricane Helene and other recent major disasters.
So those were kind of the trigger events.
It seems so. It argues these responses demonstrated serious issues, requiring a full-scale review by, highly experienced individuals, not just a quick look-see.
And the EO immediately pivots, doesn't it? From just looking at external performance to digging into, internal systemic decay. It requires the Council to evaluate whether FEMA's internal bureaucracy ultimately harms the agency's ability to successfully respond.
Yeah, that's a key phrase.
So they're not just asking if the agency failed, they're asking if the agency's own rules, its own administrative weight, actually caused the failure.
Exactly. And what's fascinating here is how the document then moves from, let's say, generalized financial incompetence to addressing specific concerns about impartiality.
Impartiality, okay.
Yeah, concerns so serious they're actually cited as immediate obstacles to an immediate, effective, and impartial response. Those are the words used.
And the order flags two specific areas, right? Two areas of controversy that the review has to address mutually. These sound like significant allegations that really challenge the core mission of equitable aid.
They are pretty significant. The first concern, it focuses on political neutrality. The EO cites serious concerns of political bias.
Okay.
And it specifically references a claim by at least one former FEMA responder that managers directed her to avoid homes of individuals supporting the campaign of Donald J. Trump for president.
Wow. Just having that spelled out in an executive order.
It tells you something, doesn't it? The mere presence of an allegation like that within a presidential EO shows the high-stakes nature of the trust issues facing FEMA right now.
Okay, so that's the first one. Political bias. What's the second?
The second controversial area focuses on mission scope, or what the document calls FEMA having lost mission focus.
Lost mission focus, meaning?
Meaning the EO states this diversion pulls limited staff and resources away from the core job, disaster recovery. And it backs up that mission-focused complaint with a pretty startling financial detail. It mentions that this diversion includes the agency spending well over $1 billion to welcome illegal aliens.
$1 billion on that specifically.
That's the figure cited in the order, yeah. So the order uses these two specific, high controversy issues, the political concerns and the mission diversion, to argue that the agency is struggling to promote national resilience.
And when they talk about national resilience, just to clarify, they mean the country's ability to take a hit, a catastrophic blow, and bounce back quickly, right?
Precisely. That's exactly it. They're basically arguing that the $30 billion isn't buying resilience, it's buying massive, maybe slow government intervention. So the Council's overarching goal is to recommend immediate structural changes that prioritize the national interest and truly ensure that bounce-back capability.
Okay, so let's turn now to the group actually tasked with solving these pretty foundational issues. Section 2 sets up the Federal Emergency Management Agency Review Council, no more than 20 members. And this is where this sort of structural intent of the EO becomes really clear.
Yeah, the leadership of this council is the first major signal. The co-chairs are the Secretary of Homeland Security and, significantly, the Secretary of Defense.
Secretary of Defense.
Sure.
Okay, having DoD co-chairing this, that signals this isn't just like a domestic aid issue or some simple insurance claim processing problem anymore.
Right.
It feels like it's being treated as a critical logistics failure, maybe even a national security vulnerability.
Right.
What does that pairing imply for the focus of the review, do you think?
Well, it really implies a focus on massive logistical challenges. Things like moving immense quantities of supplies, coordinating multi-state infrastructure rebuilding, deploying resources efficiently. Stuff the military's expert at, frankly.
Right. Competence on a grand scale.
Exactly. This mandate seems to be about competence on a grand scale. And furthermore, the membership has to include distinguished individuals from outside the federal government appointed by the president.
Ah, so not just agency insiders. And the required expertise for those non-federal members is specific, isn't it?
Very specific.
They need diverse perspectives in disaster relief, emergency preparedness, natural disasters, federal-state relationships. That seems
Great think critically, budget management.
Budget management.
So they need people who understand the financial side, but also that political friction between Washington, D.C. and, say, the governor's offices.
They absolutely do. And, if you, the listener, are worried this is going to be another one of those long, drawn-out government processes, well, the timeline in Section 3 seems designed to prevent that. It's aggressive. How aggressive are we talking?
Very. The first public meeting has to be held within 90 days of the January 24th order signing date.
90 days.
And the final report to the president is due only 180 days after that first meeting.
Wait, so 90 days plus 180 days. That's like 270 days total. Roughly 9 months.
Roughly, yeah.
9 months to structurally dismantle and maybe rebuild an agency that handles $30 billion a year? That timeline alone suggests, I don't know, panic. Or maybe just extreme urgency from the executive branch.
It is extreme, and the council itself is temporary. It terminates 1 year from the date of the order unless it gets extended, which really forces immediate focus and action. No time for delay tactics.
Okay, shifting gears now to the core functions. What exactly must this council investigate? Section 3 mandates a deep, critical assessment that goes, well, far beyond just a simple performance review.
It truly does. The first item is, yes, a performance check, assessing the adequacy of FEMA's response during the previous 4 years. That's standard enough. But the real analytical kicker is the comparison point that has to follow.
Ah, that comparison point. That sounds key for the public, for understanding what works. The council must compare FEMA responses with state, local, and interestingly, private sector responses during the same period.
Exactly. It's a direct test of centralized efficiency versus, other ways of doing things.
So what are they comparing? Like speed, resources?
All of the above.
Yeah.
They have to evaluate the difference in timeliness, the quality of supplies provided, the overall efficacy, and even the provision of basic services like communications and electricity provided by these different entities.
So they're basically asking, was the big federal agency actually better, faster, or more helpful than, say, the local police, the utility crews, or maybe even private charities that showed up first on the scene?
That's the core question. That evaluation leads directly into the structural analysis part. The council is required to investigate the historical background.
Historical?
Yeah, historical methods of disaster aid used before FEMA was even part of the Department of Homeland Security. And even methods used before FEMA existed at all.
Wow. Why would they mandate looking back like 50 years or more?
Well, that tells you they're likely building a case against the current structure, or at least seriously questioning it, not just trying to fix a few broken processes within it.
So it's aimed squarely at that federal-state relationship debate then?
Seems like it, very much so.
Okay, this debate is probably the biggest policy question on the table here, and maybe we should unpack it a bit for the listener. The council has to evaluate whether FEMA should function primarily as a support agency.
Right.
That provides supplemental federal assistance versus the current model. What's the real practical difference between support and potentially supplanting, as the critics might say?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. It's kind of the difference between being a reserve team versus staging a takeover. Wow. If FEMA acts as a support agency, it essentially means your local governor, your state emergency manager, they're still the fire chief, right? They're the decision maker, the coordinator. And FEMA simply steps in with specialized equipment or maybe extra funding when the local or state budget runs out.
Yeah.
They supplement the local efforts. They back them up.
Okay, I get that. So they help, but don't necessarily take charge.
No.
And the current model, the one being criticized,
That's closer to what critics called the supplanting model. This is where, in some cases, FEMA arrives, potentially takes over the management, imposes federal rules and procedures for everything, and effectively, might sideline the local police chief, the utility head, maybe even aspects of local government for the duration of the crisis. Critics argue that model can be slow, definitely bureaucratic, and it disconnects the response from vital local knowledge and needs. So the council is mandated to figure out which approach actually serves the national interest better.
And they can't just decide this in a vacuum, right? They have to bring the public debate into their findings.
Absolutely. The EO requires them to account for all the commentary and debate surrounding FEMA's role in the federal system. They also have to analyze the principal arguments for and against major FEMA reform.
Including specific proposals.
Yes, including an appraisal of the merits and even the legality of specific reform proposals that might already be floating around Congress or think tanks.
And to make sure these recommendations aren't just theoretical, they have to talk to people on the ground.
Crucial point. The council must solicit information from a really broad range of stakeholders. Ordinary Americans affected by natural disasters, the research community, the private sector, and, critically important, state, local, and tribal governments.
So basically, they need input from everyone who's been on the receiving end of the current model, good or bad.
Exactly. They need the ground truth.
So putting this all together, this Executive Order EO 14180, it really isn't just some high-level review. It feels like a foundational challenge to the entire philosophy of disaster response we've built up in the United States over decades.
I think that's fair to say. It's seriously questioning whether centralized, federalized disaster response, which has certainly been the trend, is actually better, more effective than maybe a state-led, locally coordinated effort, perhaps with federal support rather than federal control.
It's forcing a kind of public accounting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Of whether the efficiency we might lose to bureaucracy outweighs the benefits we gain from having those massive federal resources on tap.
That seems to be the core tension they need to resolve. And for, the average American family or maybe a small business owner listening to this, the council's findings on things like timeliness, staffing levels, and especially that fundamental question of state versus federal control, well, that's going to directly affect how they prepare for, and more importantly, how they recover from the next catastrophe.
Yeah, because if this council recommends a big philosophical shift, maybe back toward more local or state control, it could mean that next time disaster strikes your area, your state governor, not some distant federal bureaucrat, might have the primary authority over where that initial emergency road funding goes or how quickly temporary housing gets set up. It changes who's in the driver's seat.
It absolutely could, which leads to a really interesting final thought. Given that the council is mandated to look back at historical disaster aid methods from before FEMA,
Right.
what essential lessons might they uncover about achieving true national resilience? Lessons that maybe focus less on that staggering $30 billion annual federal check, and perhaps more on empowering local communities, local governments, maybe even individuals to handle, say, 90% of the response themselves, with the Fed stepping in only for that truly catastrophic, overwhelming 10%.
That's a powerful question. Shifting the focus from massive budgets to maybe local capacity and preparedness.
Exactly. What did we know or do before we relied so heavily on Washington? That's the thought we'll leave you with as this rapid, pretty aggressive review gets underway.